Emma and Greg had always dreamed of finding a peaceful retreat away from the noise and bustle of city life. When they stumbled upon the old farmhouse in Ashford Pines, they knew instantly it was a place they had been looking for. Nestled in the hills of Kentucky, surrounded by towering trees and thick woods, the house exuded an undeniable charm. Its weathered exterior, with a large front porch overlooking the expansive view of the forest, felt like the perfect escape from the pressures of their daily lives. At first, everything seemed idyllic. The air was fresh, the nights were peaceful, and the only sound they heard during the day was the occasional chirping of birds or the rustle of the wind in the trees. There was something comforting about the house, a sense of history, like it had witnessed the passage of generations, and now it was ready for Emma and Greg to make their own memories. They moved in quickly, unpacking boxes and setting up their new life. For the first few days, it felt like they had found their paradise. But on the third night, something changed. It started out as a whisper, soft, distant. Emma was curled up on the couch, reading a book while Greg worked on his laptop at the kitchen table. The sound was faint at first, like a distant melody drifting on the wind. She thought it might have been a passing car, but then she heard it more clearly, the soft strains of Rockabye Baby. The song was sweet, but something about it sounded off. It was as if it were being sung by a ghost, echoing faintly through the trees. "Do you hear that?" Emma asked Greg, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg paused and listened, his brow furrowing. "Yeah, it's coming from the woods. Probably some local kids messing around." Emma nodded, though a chill crawled up her spine. She tried to shake it off. It was probably just some prank, nothing to worry about. But the following evening, it happened again. This time, the lullaby was joined by low chanting, a series of words Emma couldn't understand. It wasn't just a child song anymore. It was something darker, foreign, eerie. The hairs on the back of Emma's neck stood on end. "That's not normal," she muttered, gripping the armrest of the couch as if it could somehow anchor her to reality. Greg, ever the skeptic, stood up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. "I'll go check it out," he said, his voice calm, though Emma could tell there was unease in his eyes. "I don't think that's a good idea," she protested, but it was too late. Greg had already grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, stepping into the cold night air. Emma tried to focus on the crackling fire in the fireplace, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Minutes ticked by, and still Greg didn't return. The lullaby had stopped, but the chanting continued, soft, eerie, and almost hypnotic. Finally, the door creaked open, and Greg stepped inside. His face was pale, and there was a look of terror in his eyes that made Emma's heart race. "It's worse than I thought," Greg said, his voice strained. "I found something in the woods." Before Emma could respond, he grabbed her by the shoulders and shook his head. "You won't believe it, but I need you to stay inside and lock the doors, no matter what." "What did you find, Greg?" she asked, panic rising in her chest. Greg didn't answer right away. He just stared at her, his eyes wide with fear. I don't know how to explain it. There was an altar made of charred wood and branches, with strange symbols drawn in the dirt. It looked like some kind of ritual site. Emma's stomach dropped. "That's insane. Who would do something like that?" Greg shook his head, his hands trembling. "I don't know, but there's more." As I was turning to leave, I felt something touch my shoulder. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was cold, ice cold. Greg continued, his voice barely a whisper. I turned around and there were people. They were cloaked, all of them, hoods up, faces hidden. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their eyes on me, like they were watching me. "What do they say?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg swallowed hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. One of them whispered, "You have to join us." Emma stared at him, her blood running cold. "What did you do?" "I ran," Greg said quickly, his voice breaking. "I bolted back inside and locked the door. They didn't follow me, but I could feel them out there, watching, waiting." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Emma wanted to dismiss it as some kind of bad dream, but the fear in Greg's eyes was real. She had never seen him like this before, so utterly shaken. The next day, they contacted the local authorities. The sheriff, a grizzled man with a thick accent, listened to Greg's story with a mixture of skepticism and concern. He promised to send someone to investigate, but when they ventured into the woods, they found no sign of the cloaked figures. The only thing they found was the remnants of an old ritual site, charred earth and burnt branches scattered around a patch of dirt, where strange symbols had been scratched into the ground. The sheriff shrugged it off, attributing it to some local kids playing at being witches. But Greg and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister was at play. That night, the lullaby returned. It wasn't just a song this time. It was louder, clearer, more insistent. The haunting melody echoed through the trees, making Emma feel as though the woods themselves were alive, closing in around them. Emma lay awake in the dark, her heart pounding. She could feel the house creaking and groaning, like it was alive, like it was aware of them. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow more ominous. Her thoughts raced, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing seemed to fit. When morning came, they packed their bags and left Ashford Pines. There was nothing more to be said. They didn't speak about it to anyone, not the sheriff, not their friends, not even each other. It was a nightmare they both wanted to forget. The farmhouse, now abandoned, still stands at the edge of the woods. And every so often, if you listen closely enough, you can hear it, the faint, eerie lullaby, drifting to the trees like a forgotten memory. And somewhere, deep in the woods, the cloaked figures wait, their whispers carried on the wind, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon Ashford Pines. Perhaps one day, someone else will hear the lullaby and venture into the woods, just like Greg did. Only this time, they may not come back. It had been a week since I arrived at the manor, and the air here was thick with the weight of its history. The house, inherited from my late aunt, was a sprawling, eerie thing, its high, crooked windows casting long shadows on the cracked stone walls. I had come to escape the suffocating grief of losing my family, to get away from the memories that haunted me every waking moment. But the manor itself, a grand old structure perched on the edge of the isolated hills, felt like a refuge from nothing but my own mind. The first night, I had trouble sleeping. The bed was large and the comforter heavy, but the silence was unnerving. The floorboards creaked under the weight of unseen steps, and the wind howled outside like some beast roaming the hills. I lay there in the dark, my thoughts swirling around the tragedies that had brought me here. The crash, the loss, the void that had consumed my world. With a sigh, I reached for the small bottle of sleeping pills on the nightstand, hoping the medicine would finally offer me peace. Around midnight, I woke up with a start. The deep quiet had shifted, replaced by a soft, rhythmic chanting, as though it was coming from just beyond the door to the hallway. It was low, muffled, but undeniably there. My heart began to pound in my chest as I sat up, disoriented and unsure where I was. The air in the room felt thick, colder than it should have been, and the chanting seemed to intensify, growing louder with every passing second. I didn't know what was real anymore. The sound of shuffling feet reached my ears, and my pulse quickened. Without thinking, I threw off the covers and padded barefoot toward the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. The chanting was clearer now. There were words, but they were foreign to me, unfamiliar. I should have stayed in my room, locked the door, and called for help. But instead, my curiosity got the better of me, and I crept down the long, dimly lit hallway toward the grand staircase. As I descended the stairs, the chanting grew louder, its intensity vibrating through the walls and floor beneath my feet. I could feel in my bones. My hands trembled as I held onto the railing for support. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused, my breath hitching. In the hallway before me, a group of hooded figures stood in a circle. Their cloaks were black, their hoods raised high, obscuring their faces. I couldn't see who they were, but the presence of so many of them sent a chill through me. They were performing some kind of ritual, their hands raised toward an object in the center of the room. The object glowed faintly, an unearthly light spilling out from beneath it. As my eyes adjusted to the dimness of the hallway, I could see its shape, a twisted, grotesque figure, ancient and worn. It looked like some sort of idol, but the details were unclear in the flickering candlelight. I should have turned and run. I should have screamed, called out, anything, but my body refused to move. I was frozen, hidden behind a tall pillar at the edge of the room, too terrified to make a sound. One of the figures, taller than the rest, stepped forward, its slow, deliberate movements sending shivers down my spine. As it neared, the hood fell back, revealing a mask that I instantly recognized. It was the same one my aunt had worn when she performed her healing ceremonies, those strange rituals that she claimed were meant to cure ailments, calm spirits, or protect us from dark forces. It had been part of her strange practices for as long as I could remember, though I never understood them. I didn't want to, but seeing that mask now, in the hands of someone else, someone who clearly was my aunt, made my stomach turn. The figure's eyes, hidden behind the mask's hollow eye sockets, seemed to look straight at me, even though it said nothing, even though it made no move toward me. I felt a sickening connection, as if it knew I was there. A scream bubbled up in my throat, but was swallowed by the overwhelming fear. I wanted to run, to escape, but my feet remained glued to the floor. The figure lingered, staring at me, its eyes unblinking. It was as if the very presence of the mask held me in place, as though I was caught in some kind of trance. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, the figure turned and joined the others. They continued their chanting, their voices rising in unison as they began to move around the idol, their hands weaving patterns in the air. I couldn't bear it any longer. I screamed a hoarse, terrified cry, and in an instant, everything went silent. The figures, the chanting, the eerie glow of the idol, all vanished in the blink of an eye, as if the whole thing had never happened. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stood alone in the hallway, staring at the empty space where the ritual had just occurred. There was nothing, no sign of the hooded figures, no idol, no glowing light, just the cold, oppressive silence of the manor. I stumbled back to my room, my mind racing with questions that made no sense. What had I seen? What had I heard? Was it some sort of dream or hallucination brought on by the pills? I had to know. The next morning, I searched the house, desperate for answers. But everything seemed normal, eerily so. The manor stood still, as it always had, its dark corners hiding secrets I could never have imagined. But then, as I made my way through the grand hallway, I saw it. The markings. They were subtle at first. Faint symbols etched into the walls and floor in places I hadn't noticed before. A strange series of glyphs, overlapping and intricate, seemed to swirl around the edges of the hall like some kind of web. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but the longer I looked, the clearer they became, etched deeply into the old wood and stone, as if they had been carved there for centuries. I wasn't imagining it. As the days passed, the strange occurrences grew more frequent. The whispers in the halls became louder. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and I began to feel an overwhelming presence, as though I was being watched from every corner of the manor. I found myself drawn to my aunt's study, compelled by something I couldn't explain. There, hidden among her papers and journals, I found her diary. It was a thick leather-bound book, its pages yellow with age. As I flipped through it, I was horrified to discover the truth. My aunt had been involved in an occult cult. The cult had practiced dark rituals for generations, and my family had been at the center of it all. She had been a part of their ceremonies, performing them herself, always seeking power, always sacrificing something in return. And now, it seemed, the cult had claimed me as its next victim. I tried to leave. I packed my bags, desperate to escape the suffocating grip of the manor. But as soon as I reached the door, it slammed shut, as if the house itself refused to let me go. Panic surged through me as I tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house had come alive, its walls and floors shifting to keep me inside. I was trapped. The whispers began again, louder now, growing more insistent. And in the dark corners of the house, I could see the hooded figures, standing still, watching me. Their masks glowed faintly in the dark, just as they had before. They had been waiting for me. The cult had claimed me, and there was no escape. I was part of their ritual now, an eternal prisoner of the manor, bound to it by the dark forces that had haunted my family for generations. And as I stood there alone and terrified, I realized the truth. The past dark influence had seeped into the present, trapping me in its endless cycle of ritual and sacrifice. I was just another link in the chain, another soul lost to the manor's curse of history, and there was no way out.